Hello there and welcome to the Hawks Nest. I want to welcome today one of the very honored guests I want to say that I've ever had on this channel today. Very kind enough to take time away to sit down with us. A man that is one of those stories that you would write about in a movie. He went from being a ball boy all the way up to being a general manager for your Seattle Seahawks. Not talked enough about, frankly, enough in our history, Randy. Was a very good general manager for your Seahawks, orchestrated some very good trades. In my opinion, had to do a little bit of it with I'm not going to say full on arm tied behind your back, but when you're dealing with a man like Ken Behring and the limitations in a man trying to move a team, that certainly doesn't help matters. He also was an executive the year after he moved on from Seattle with the Saints, the Dolphins. So when this man speaks, when he talks about matters in regards to the NFL, you should probably listen. And especially when it comes to our Seattle Seahawks, I want to welcome, thank you so much, former general manager of the Seattle Seahawks, former vice president of the Seattle Seahawks, Randy Mueller, to the show. Welcome, Randy.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very nice introduction. I feel honored to be here. I think you listed a lot of things that really tells me I've just been around a long time. That's all.
Well, when you do something good for a long period of time, you start building up those accolades and, you know, that resume starts going. Randy also is right now on The Athletic with Mike Sando, another Pacific Northwest guy that we're very well aware of. So you can catch him over. They've got a podcast. I've linked it below in the description section below. So please do get subbed up to that podcast. And as I said, he's always got some good nuggets. And Randy, we don't have you for a long time today. So I want to just kind of dive right into the thick of it. And I want to go back through a few things that I've heard through times and confirm some stories if we can or not confirm. And I know you weren't at this point a general manager in the early 90s, but you were within the team. You were serving in a very strong role at that time. Can you confirm or deny the Chuck Knox, I wanted the kid from Mississippi rather than Dan McGuire story?
Well, I can't confirm. I was around at that time, obviously not part of any decision-making. There were a lot of things on the table. I remember that at that time. Chuck did voice his opinion often, and most of the time it was heard loud and clear. So he and Mike McCormick had a great relationship, as people know that have been Seahawks fans for a long time. Mike McCormick was the GM, Hall of Fame tackle. I was lucky, I'll be honest. I came up under guys that understood the game, the business, and for some reason took a liking to me and kind of just took me in under their wing. And I spent, almost 20 years with the Seahawks. So I saw a lot of people come and go, but I sure learned a lot from a lot of great people and minds in the business. So I don't know about that specific one, but when Chuck talked, we all listened. That's for sure.
Did he tend to be right on personnel matters in addition to being a good coach when he was talking about things? Because sometimes that's obviously with coaches, they'll be great coaches, but when it comes to them trying to get into the personnel matters, it's a different story.
Well, we were in good hands with Mike McCormick as our GM, and he was very good on the personnel end. I'll tell you what Chuck was really good at. Chuck was great at gathering information. He had guys, the Will McDonoughs of the world and all of the initial media guys. I don't know if you remember Will McDonough, but he was the John Clayton before John Clayton. In fact, he was John's mentor in the business. Longtime NBC media guy. Chuck did a great job of gathering information for us on the personnel side. And when I mean gather, he had intel on draft picks. He had intel on other teams, stuff that we couldn't get in our end of the business. So Chuck was really good at that. He understood especially offensive line play, because that's really what he came up as, an offensive line coach. So just think about it. We had a Hall of Fame offensive lineman as our GM, and Chuck Knox, a long time great, really a Hall of Fame offensive line coach himself. So we were in good hands when it came to building an offensive line. And I think that was one of our strengths, at least during the 80s when Chuck was running the team. We had a really good offensive line, and that kind of endured and carried us for 10 or 12 years that Chuck was there.
Yeah, a creative running game for his time too, if I might say. You're not just we're going to plow into the A gap all day long, but he was willing to kind of attack from a variety of different angles too. Well, you start to ascend then, and it wasn't reportedly, it wasn't McCormick that was saying that, which fact it was reportedly coming from ownership, as the story as it goes, that he was the guy that wanted McGuire. I can only guess, I think, maybe Ken was a baseball fan or something.
I can add this. I can add this to that, and yes. Ken was a fan of Dan McGuire. Dan had Lee Steinberg as his agent. And Ken had a relationship with him, as did Ken Hoffman, a minority partner, who was a baseball guy and was part owner of the Oakland A's at that time. So there were some ties to the agent for Dan McGuire. And that's may or may not have had a lot to do with it, but it was definitely a factor for sure.
Well, I don't have to tell you, it's always good when the owners start having some influence over those quarterback decisions, isn't it, Randy? It's always a good thing for you general managers. You love that, don't you? Isn't it just great?
I was gray at 30, I'll tell you that. And part of it was that.
I bet. I would drive me absolutely crazy. It's one of the most important decisions you make. Well, let's push real quick forward. And I'm bouncing fast because I know you're on limited time with this to the 90s as you're taking over as a general manager, and you get to go from a Bearing to a Paul Allen as an owner. It's like going from having your e-brake held down to now, hey, we're going to put some NOS on the engines, get this going. And one of the moves you make as far as the first moves and going out there, early moves with this was you were part of the Chad Brown situation in the signing. Is that right? Were you in on that?
That's correct. Yes.
And one thing, number one, I would say it's probably the most successful free agent signing in Seahawks history. If we really, and I've thought a lot about this when you go through it, you can go and look at some value signings they did on 1-year deals and guys that eventually signed, but I'm pure like, we're giving this guy big money and then he's going to come in here and produce for us on that contract. I think that there's a fair argument to be said that that's the best one in Seahawks history.
Well, it's an interesting story, that's for sure. We just felt like at that time, and there was a lot of strategy behind our one recruitment of Chad and then signing him. It's kind of a fun story. Dennis Erickson and I, Dennis was the head coach, we actually picked Chad up in a jet at midnight when free agency started in Denver, and his agent, Peter Schaefer, brought them to Seattle, thinking that we had to be first. We had to throw our biggest offer at him. And if he left, it was going to be very risky for him to be able to get that somewhere else. And that's kind of how it transpired. We ended up, and it's funny, Mickey Loomis was our contracting cap guy, the long GM of the Saints. Mickey and I were working on this deal with Peter, and we actually, and this is a true story, slid a check for $7 million across the table in front of Chad. He was scheduled to go to Carolina the next day to make a visit there. And we said, that's fine. You can go to Carolina, but you're going to be walking away from $7 million on this check. And it was a legitimate check that it was going to be his signing bonus. And at that time, in that year, that was giant money. Of course, he and his agent, Peter Schaefer, they huddled about it. And it wasn't but an hour later, we were ordering sushi and they were signing with the Seahawks. So it was kind of a little recruiting ploy and it was kind of cute, but it was also kind of thought through that our next guy was on the way in as well. So if he didn't take it, this check was going to go to somebody else. And he didn't have another option going to Carolina that he knew for sure was going to pay $7 million up front. So kind of a fun story, but we were happy to have him. He came for us and really played well for, 6 or 7 years for sure. Made a couple Pro Bowls himself. Chad was one of those guys where you could play him anywhere. He kind of had a long frame, played on the edge, but the Steelers had used him as an inside linebacker in their 4 defense. And we wanted to move him outside and put him on the edge and let him rush the passer. So it was really a good chance for him to expand his repertoire, expand his game. And it made some sense for him to make sacks. And it was obviously easier to do that from the edge. So that was a couple of reasons why we ended up signing Chad Brown.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and he played marvelous. It's so often you see these free agent contracts, the players come in, Randy, and they don't perform. And you guys hadn't spent a lot of money at that time, and this was your first coming off Bearing. You know, there was no free agent contracts coming down the line, so to have kind of the stones on that to pick this guy and go for it, and you did the private jet thing too. So you even kind of that with the check, you paired it all together. It was very well orchestrated on your guys' part. So let's keep moving here on the draft. You took Anthony Simmons. How close were you to taking Randy Moss?
We talked a lot about him. I don't know if people remember, but when Randy Moss came out, he had come from Florida State, where there was a bunch of baggage that followed him to Marshall, and there was a bunch of baggage at Marshall. And Randy will be the first one to tell you he wasn't the most mature at that time. So there were issues. And we had this discussion. I remember myself talking to Bob Witz about it and in turn to Paul about it, just to go through the baggage that was there. Here's what we decided. We had a different need, a little different player that we wanted to acquire. But if you remember this, the Vikings were the team that picked him. They were a team that at the time had no owner. They were in the middle of an ownership sale. So I remember talking to Dennis Green about this. He said, I didn't have to go get approval from any owner. I didn't have to get somebody to check the box. And it was clear that they were going to have to, because of Randy's background, they were going to have to run it all the way up to the top of the flagpole. And Minnesota was a team that didn't have the top of the flagpole because they had no owner at the time. So that was one of the reasons why he ended up in Minnesota. But I mean, obviously he would have been a great player for Seattle as well. Played, 15 years and was just as fast in year 15 as he was in year 1. It's funny, later on, I went to New Orleans and we played Minnesota, I think 3 times, 2 regular season and once in the playoff. I think he had 4 catches in those 3 games, but all 4 were for touchdowns. And I think it was 306 yards or something like that in those 4 catches. That's how explosive he was. And maybe that was my payback for not drafting him.
Well, I think it's the part that you guys have to weigh in that us fans don't have the opportunity. When we do all of our little evaluations on the players and watching the tape, the place I always say that we can't look into is the background checks. And you guys get these stories, and sometimes I'm sure you guys get some pretty eye-opening stories at that would make many of us have a lot of hesitation to take in these players. And that's why I want to ask. And I get the impression, not just from the feeling of you on this, but with Randy in general and what we heard with him, and that he was a guy that did have some of these guys have differing levels of baggage, and there's a lot on top of this one if you're going to make it. No doubt about the talent. It wasn't a matter of you guys didn't see the talent. You did. It was a matter of the baggage was just too big.
That's right. At that time, it just wasn't the thing for us. It was just too risky.
Well, the man that also signed away, I think, is the best free agent contract in history. We could make the argument on it being a 1-2 of the best trade in Seahawks history, Randy, because certainly the Russell Wilson trade's looking like a good one in retrospect here with the picks the Hawks made, but you made a pretty good one as well. And this is a little bit of a player in here in Rick Mirer. We got a little bit to get with because you were again there in the early 90s, not as much you were part of the process of drafting him. So real quick question is, would the team have gone with Bledsoe or Mirer if, in your opinion, if let's say they had the choice between the two? I know they didn't because you had New England ahead of them to pick Bledsoe at that time. Okay. And then can you take me through the process of how you pulled off this trade with Mirer when the star had dimmed at that point? He had the one good first rookie year where it's like, ooh, we've got a guy here. Yeah. And then it just really tapered off. But yet you got a first round pick back for him. Which then you again got Walter Jones. So the whole situation is one that to me needs a little bit of unpacking, if you can, on your part with that one, because it's just a tremendous trade and just the whole situation, how it worked out from it's just wild.
Yeah, it's quite a scenario, that's for sure. I think to answer the first part of your question, we obviously would have taken Bledsoe, Northwest kid, made a lot of sense in Dennis Erickson's offense at the time. It was going to be, I'm sorry, that was not Dennis at that time. That was Tom Flores, who was the GM. And that would have made sense in any offense, to be honest with you. I don't think we really, at the time, and I was not one of the decision makers, I don't think Tom really had a preference. In other words, to move up, he would have had to given a pretty penny just to move up one spot. That didn't happen. So we did take Rick. And like you say, Rick had a phenomenal rookie year. He put on a show with his legs. Made great strides toward being an NFL quarterback. And then the change at coaching and the philosophy came, and it was completely different when Dennis got there. We were a throwing team. We were not a downhill running team. We were not much of a play action team. So the skill set needed to run Dennis's offense was totally different. I loved Rick. I think Rick was one of my favorite players of all time. It just wasn't going to work out in Dennis's system. We kind of took advantage of a couple things when we narrowed in on Chicago. One, they were looking obviously for a quarterback. Their president at the time, big Notre Dame grad, loved Notre Dame players. Chicago,
Randy, you devil.
I'm just saying, Chicago, close to Notre Dame. It was a giant get for the Bears to get the Notre Dame quarterback who had been the star in Notre Dame for 3 or 4 years, something like that. So we played on some emotion there, I think, and we're just kind of lucky. I'm not saying it's anything we did. It just worked out that these guys really wanted Rick. And Marvin Demoff was his agent, and Marvin wanted him out of Seattle. And so we all kind of worked together on it. I don't know if there's a trade that I worked harder on that I was, happy to make when we did it. And I remember after we went back and forth, and part of the thing that held up the deal was Rick had to agree to a new contract. And so it's easy to trade a player who, when you don't have to involve the contract and negotiations with that player's contract, it's a whole nother story when that player has to do a new contract, because then he has some say in it. He obviously wanted to go to Chicago. It was close to home. it was going to work out. But Marvin Demoff, in my opinion, one of the best agents of all time, was not going to let Rick go to Chicago without, one, agreeing to the deal, but two, bringing something with him to the Bears. So at the end of the day, yes, we got a first-round pick from them, but I had to kick in a fourth-round pick to go with him so that Marvin and Rick could say, hey, we got you a fourth-round pick and Rick Mirer. So there was some egos involved. There were a lot of give and takes involved, and we thought it was worth it to acquire the first-round pick. And when it happened, and this is the only time I can ever remember doing this, once the trade was finalized, I remember walking out of my office and walking down to see Mickey, and I've referred to Mickey a few times. We spent 15 years together at the Seahawks, and he was at the other end of the hall, and I was coming to see him to tell him, hey, that it's final. We're going to do this. Before I could even say anything, he said, I could see the smile on your face, and he gave me the biggest hug. We hugged like two kids in the hallway. that we were able to acquire a first-round pick for Rick, and what was kind of bittersweet, to be honest with you, because we both loved Rick. We used to play golf with him. We wanted him and his personality to lead the Seahawks for a long time. It just wasn't going to be a good match in the system we were in.
Yeah. If he had been in a pure West Coast offense, of course, I heard that he had gotten the Bill Walsh seal of approval when he came out. If he had been in that offense from day one in his career, starting out and just maintained into it, do you think that Mirer ends up having, he didn't have a bad career, but a more successful career?
Played a long time, earned a lot of money, but yes. And to that end, that the 49ers were the only other team that were kind of in the mix for trading for Rick. I remember Eddie DeBartolo was there, and Carmen Policy was kind of running their team at that time. And I remember them calling me, and they didn't have a first-round pick. And they tried their hardest to convince me and us to take a second-round pick because it was just better for Rick. And he said, we'll give you this second. We'll even give you a second next year on top of it. But they must have spent 30 minutes trying to talk me into trying to make this make sense to me that we should just take their second-round pick for the good of Rick and his future. And obviously I couldn't do that. But I always had a little part in my heart that, hey, they were selling. They were trying anything they could to get Rick. And we ended up trading him, like you say, to Chicago for a first-rounder. So we couldn't really take the 49ers offer seriously, but they were the other team that, to answer your question, yes, that had given him the stamp of approval when he came out.
Yeah, and those are two late second-round picks of the Niners at that time you're getting. So basically third-round picks at that. Yeah, and no way. No, thank you. Hi. Question about Walter Jones, because you also then use that pick in trading for Rick Mirer to go get a Hall of Fame player. No big deal. I mean, just what general managers do, Randy. That's just a normal day at the office for you. But you, in Walter Jones, you get him. And did you know and see the upside in him when you selected him with that pick for what he became, which is some people's argument of being the best left tackle in the history of the NFL? Or was it that we had an upper level grade on him? We had him, he should be a Pro Bowl level kind of player.
We thought that draft was a 6-player draft. We had picks, I think 11 and 12 or 10 and 11. I can't remember. So we felt like we would give anything we could to move up and get in that top 6. I didn't realize we could get into 3, which we picked Shawn Springs, and 6 and Walter Jones. So we got 2 of the top 6 on our board. That doesn't always work out. Trust me. That's just, we got lucky. We made a couple calls at the last second that fell through, but got tipped off on another call. There's a 30 for 30 out there somewhere. We're turning those later picks into 3 and 6. So I'll say this. We loved Walter. We saw exactly what he became, but we had no idea he was going to be as good as he was. It was a risky pick because he played very little. He had only played the 1 year at Florida State. So he didn't have a lot of film to go on. I remember reading some quotes of some seasoned general managers, and I was young, like you mentioned earlier, and those seasoned general managers said, I couldn't have made that move. There's no way I would have done that. There just wasn't enough. So maybe my naiveness, maybe my young and wet years and didn't know I didn't know, maybe that helped us make a deal like that. But yeah, it turned out great. And obviously Walter, Hall of Fame. And I would concur, maybe best left tackle to ever play. You'd like to say we saw that all the time, but there's no way. We developed him, but his talent when he came to us it was one of those things. And Howard Mudd was our offensive line coach, long time O-line coach in the NFL. And I remember going into his office and we said, there's no way we can get this guy. And it worked out that we did. And I remember he was thrilled beyond thrilled. Right. And I remember he said, when I walked in his office, Howard said, I know, Randy, I know, just don't screw him up. And I said, yeah, that's kind of, he was polished and ready to go. And it was up to us not to screw him up. And we didn't, fortunately for the Seahawks.
It's got to be one of the toughest calls for you in the draft when you're picking high and you have a guy that has those limited starts, but is so physically tantalizing and offers so much upside. But you want that tape, you want those extra years, to go off of with that. If you had I know this wasn't the scenario, but if it had been the scenario where you had your opportunity to pick between either Orlando Pace or Walter Jones in that draft, are you still taking Walter?
No, I think we would have taken Pace. I think he was pretty much a consensus first pick. Everybody on our staff, from coaches to scouts to directors, we all were on the same page with Walter being the second of those two tackles. But Walter was, I think, the fourth player on our board, only behind Shawn, who we got with the third pick. That was a great draft of Hall of Fame talent. Trust me.
It was very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Those top six players, I'll say this, and kudos to our staff. We had them lined up right, and we were just fortunate to get two of the six.
As was Shawn Springs, because he had that whole Deion Sanders kind of swag to him coming out. Did you guys have a Deion Sanders upside outlook on him, and that could be where he goes, or did you look at him as more of, he's not going to get to Deion's place, but he'll be a really good corner in this league?
We thought he'd be a really good corner. Shawn was a bigger guy. He's 6'1", could play press, could play off, could play all the techniques. He had a phenomenal senior year, could run. But I liked his makeup. I'll be honest with you. His dad played for years. Dad was a running back for the Cowboys. Nothing was going to be too big for Shawn Springs. And part of playing defensive back, as we all know, is you better have thick skin. Nothing better bother you. And you better be able to fight another fight when you get beat the play before. And I knew we'd get that with Shawn. So even if there's some ups and downs, I knew he'd be able to fight through it. And what a solid kid. He's done a great job with his life. And one of my favorite people that we drafted in Seattle in years.
Yeah, fun player to watch. And that was just, at the time, I remember in following the draft, that was some of the comps that were being thrown around to him. So that's just FYI I ask. If you didn't have, we had taken Sam Adams in 94 and we had Cortez Kennedy on the roster. If in that 95 draft, though, you didn't have Tez, do you think the team would have taken a Warren Sapp at that time, or were like Randy Moss, the character concerns would have pushed that one through?
Well, it was there. We knew about it. I don't know that we would have not taken him. I can tell you that. Like you say, we didn't really have a need at that spot. We had others that we had above him, but his baggage was simple and easy to uncover, but it wouldn't keep us from taking him. We didn't think it was anything that would take him off of our draft board. That's for sure.
But the presence of Tez.
Well, yeah. I mean, we need anybody like that once we had Tez, and the defense changed a little bit over the course of Tez's time with us. But yeah, we didn't need to take any risks. That's for sure. Yeah.
He was, that's the one where I get asked a lot about that. If we would have, in my chats, a bunch of people saying, why did we pass on this happen? And I go, well, you did take 94, 7th overall pick, Sam Adams. And then you had Tez rocking basically through his prime at that point. And even if it wasn't like, even if you didn't have Sam Adams, you were going to go out with 2-3 techs. You needed a nose tackle at that point, unless you're going to ask Tez to do that. So it just didn't quite add up. Did you guys like at all Steve McNair in that draft too, as far as to have him at where you guys were, or because you were moving off a little bit with Rick there? Was there any thought process on Steve McNair and having him be the guy you guys target if he fell? I don't think he ended up following you guys, but if he had fell.
Yeah. We liked him. We thought he was a really good player and would be a really good NFL quarterback. Alcorn State, there was a little bit of leap of faith there that you had to make from that size of a program. And I don't mind taping my ankles. I just don't want to tape them every day. And so there's sometimes risk. Sometimes risk even gets the best of us all, even us young guys that don't know we don't know.
Yeah. No, that would have been a tough one for me too. Alcorn State's that's as small school as you get, and you go, oh, I don't know what to do with that. And I'm sorry I bounce around through so fast. I know I keep you a little bit longer here with a few more questions because I know we've got a little bit of time. So just in regards to what keeps you up at night and nightmares that may cause you to toss and turn, do you see Vinnie Testaverde's huge fat dome in your nightmares? Like, is it once a week? Is it like once every 6 months? You kind of just do that move they do in the movies. You wake up, Vinnie Testaverde. Because of course I'm referencing the 1997 season, I believe, where very much jobs are in the balance at this point as to whether or not there's going to be the transition made over, and you guys are making a playoff run. You're getting hot at the right time. You're in the New York Jets. Comes down to a play, no replay at that time. Vinnie Testaverde, for the one of 5 times in his career, he decides to scramble and doesn't seem to get in, but his fat head gets over, and the official just gets caught up on that big old dome with he had the little bit of the kind of a froish thing going on too. I think it pushed his helmet up a little bit higher. Does that still kind of haunt you a little bit?
It haunts me a lot when I see instant replays, and it makes no rhyme or reason when I see what they rule. It says, because they didn't have instant replay at that time. And what happened was, it was last play of the game, 20 seconds left, and it was a quarterback sneak from like the 3-yard line. And he put his helmet out, and the referee thought that was the ball, and they gave the Jets a touchdown. And as you said, we lost the game. The next year, they voted instant replay in. Here's the funny thing about it is, I'm in the suite upstairs in Meadowlands, and I had probably 6 or 8 league office employees with us in our owner's suite for that game. And they were all in there, personnel guys from the management council. And I remember them leaving that suite after the game, all with their head down, almost afraid to look me in the eye, because they knew that we had got robbed of a game, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. It was terrible. And as you mentioned, there were a lot of coaches, a lot of jobs at stake. We needed to win the game. It would have gone a long ways toward us getting the playoffs, and things weren't really the same. But hey, I'll look at it positively as well. It got instant replay, reincarnated again in the NFL. So
Amen.
Maybe it can save some poor SOB like myself that doesn't have to go through it. So maybe that was a tip for us to get the rest of the league on board.
Still really brutal, because it's like, I talked to Chad Brown on this. He was 2 yards away from it. He said did not get in. Denver wasn't even close. It was just that head, like you said. It's the head. That's why I'm joking, but it was literally just his big skull. He's got that massive Vinnie Testaverde head that got over the top, and you go, oh, why does your head got to be so big? But right. He played the Broncos tough that year. It was a game that I think there was like 1 score in both of those 2 games. Broncos were the team that were the juggernaut that went out to the Super Bowl. So again, you start kind of walking through the proverbial scenario in your mind of getting to the playoffs, playing that Bronco team as tough as you had played them. Hard to beat a team 3 times, as they've beaten twice, but just barely that year. You just start to wonder about what could have happened if, like you said, did lead to at least I think it directly led to the replay. But that was one of the brutal moments in Seahawks history right there.
No doubt.
Well, just to pull us forward to a couple of quick hitters, if we can here, as I don't take up too much of your time on it. These will be kind of just sort of in that, and just sort of a short, you don't have to go too deeply on it, but I want to kind of bounce through a few. Give me a player that the doctors told you that this is going to explode. There's no way that this guy can make it. You love the player, and that player ended up having a long, great career. And you were right about the doctor. It never really had that injury problem that the doctors spoke about. And then vice versa, maybe on the other side, one that clean medical, but just completely fell apart at the pro level when he came to it.
You mean other than Drew Brees? That's the one that haunts me and keeps me awake at night. And every time I see Nick Saban, we just shake our heads. And if we had passed him on the physical, we'd probably both still be in Miami. Wasn't
that another owner one though? Wasn't that another where the owner comes in a little bit to have some sway on that? Or was that just purely the medicals of the doctors?
Only in this way. And just to remind people, I was the GM of the Dolphins. Nick Saban was the head coach. We had agreed that we were going to sign Drew Brees, and I actually had a deal done on a napkin that Tom Condon, his agent, and I had sorted out the night before. And I had it in my pocket. We had a press conference. We were ready to roll. All he had to do was pass the physical. He had been hurt with the Chargers the year before, and it was a pretty bad injury. It was to his throwing shoulder, and our doctors completely rejected him after making this agreement and everything was set. We both were white as ghosts. Nick and I both couldn't believe we were going to have to do this. But here's how the owner was involved. In some cases, you can overrule a little bit if it makes some sense when there's not a ton of risk. but we were going to have to pay Drew Brees. It was a $10 million year deal. It was at the time 5 years, $50 million. And our doctors said his throwing shoulder will never be the same. He got a 50-50 chance of being able to throw again like he did last year. We couldn't take that risk. And our doctor at the time of the Dolphins, our head orthopod, was best friends with Wayne Huizenga, our owner.
No.
So we couldn't go against the doctor because that's Wayne's boy. I mean, we'd have probably been firing ourselves if it didn't work out. And so we couldn't do it. It's the only time it's ever happened to me like that. Drew Brees goes on, obviously, to sign with New Orleans the next day, has a Hall of Fame career. And I've told the story many times. You know, my brother and Mickey Loomis were both there running the Saints at the time because I had just left there 2 years before. And so it's a crazy scenario. And talk about change the fortunes of a lot of people in Miami and in New Orleans. And so, yeah, that's a tough one to swallow. And still to this day, you wonder how things would have changed if we could have found a way to pass Drew on our physical, because he ended up passing the Saints physical, and obviously the rest is history.
Oh, you guys didn't have much of a pathway to getting your quarterback besides that, where Miami was at and where you guys were picking in drafts and the quarterback's coming out. If I'm not, I could be misremembering it wrong, but you didn't have a good alternative road, really.
Here's the other answer to the question you just posed. We ended up trading for Dante Culpepper, who was the quarterback of the Vikings at the time, and he was coming off a major knee injury. And our doctors said, he's great. You're going to have no problem with his knee. He's going to be 100% next year. And when we got him, he was never the same. He was never the same. Couldn't run on that leg. A year and a half later, he's out of the league. So both
and mobility was a big part of his game.
Big part of his game. He was never the same. So, hey, be careful what you wish for. And I always say, I'm no doctor. I can't. I've stayed at a few Holiday Inns, but that doesn't make me qualified to be a doctor. I don't even play one on TV, so I stay out of that lane. But that's two in particular going either way that kind of come back to haunt us in Miami.
Yeah. Well, on the Brees one now, he does say that he can barely even throw his football with his kids now. So the thing ended up coming back to her, but he got through, like you say. It's that's brutal. Mike Mamula went in the 95 draft, one pick, and this is one of the ultimate workout warriors they reference in the combine time period. He went one pick before you guys selected Joey Galloway. Please tell me there was no chance Mike Mamula was going to be a Seattle Seahawk.
No chance. No chance.
Thank God.
we were all in on Joey at that time. And the story behind that is Dennis was the coach, obviously. There were 3 receivers in that draft that all got picked in the first, I think, 12 picks. We purposely evaluated these receivers independently, Dennis and I. And then I said, let's come back at the end of it and we'll line them up and see if we both are on the same page. We were, in this case, we loved Joey. He was going to fit exactly what Dennis wanted to do. And so it made it an easy choice for the Seattle franchise. It just went our way. We had some other options, but this was our first choice. And we had a pretty good run there for a few years on first round picks, the guys we want actually falling to us. So Joey was another one that worked out good.
Any truth to rumor he ran a 4.18 on that fast Ohio State track?
Yeah, it was an awesome run. We sent Bob Bratkowski, our receiver coach, to his pro day, and he was a young coach at the time and was nervous. He was the only one there from our franchise to time him. And Bob tells the story. He said I clicked my watch when he ran across the finish line, and I looked down, and he said, I saw 419 on my watch. And he said, they sent me 3,000 miles. And he said, I screwed it up. He said, there's no way. He said, I was scared to death that I had missed the time. And he said, I can't say a word. And somebody behind him, another scout, said, I had 418. And he said, a big grin came on his face to where he could really realize that he hadn't screwed up the time. Joey did run that fast. And so we always kid Bob about that to this day. 419 is fast. Let me just say that. My 40 years in the league, I haven't had too many 4.1s. And in fact, I haven't had any. And that just shows how Joey's game was, generational from a speed standpoint.
Another guy out the Ohio State who had a little bit of that dogged mentality that you talked about with Shawn Springs too, where he was going to get after it on the football field on top of having that natural physical ability they had. But probably got it any age still to this day, if he was coming out in a draft, would probably still be taken and whatnot. I know Holmgren didn't like him for the purified route running stuff Holmgren wanted in the West Coast, and so that didn't work. But great player, absolutely marvelous player. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, man. And I'm sure you're going to poo-poo this one a little bit, but hey, I landed on a final comp for Byron Murphy in Seattle. Everyone's going to the Aaron Donald deal, and I'd like to hear your thoughts a little bit on Byron Murphy, and we can put a bit of a wrap here. We'll get close to this. My final comp was one that you're going to like or you're going to hate. I think I ended up landing on John Randall as a final comp with Byron Murphy. Am I going too far on that one?
Well, John Randall was special. And if you remember, John Randall was a free agent. He didn't get drafted. So that's
right.
Incredible. I think John was a little smaller. Not that Murphy's tall. That's not it. The style of play is similar for sure. I think Murphy might even have a little more oomph at the point of attack. The one thing about John Randall was his hay rushing the passer, but if he got he could get swallowed up at times just because he was not a big man. I think Murphy's a little bit bigger than that. I love the Murphy pick. I think they list him as an end in a 3-4, but he's going to play a lot of 3 technique. He's going to be a defensive tackle. I think he'll fit fine in Mike McDonald's defense, but that's not a bad comp that you've picked. I hope he turns out half as good as John Randall. That's for sure.
Yeah, he definitely has a little bit in that nose tackle background. You mentioned they played him so many nose tackle snaps there at Texas, even with Tavondre Sweat. That was interesting, which you could never get away with doing with John. To your point on that with it, but I'm shooting for the moon. I'm being a fan about it, Randy. I'll own that one, but I do feel the way that they could get lateral and then up the field at the same time to attack either shoulder, and then they're to lateral with the shoulder, the lineman, and then the rip move comes up and they're just passed. And watching Randall again on his tape, I just went, wow, that's the same thing Randall used to do and how he attacked. Well, one final question, I guess, kind of last couple questions, because I've already taken you way past the time we said we were going to do, but I want to just, this last question be about the quarterback, if we can. This is one of the hotly debated topics right now in the Seahawks fandom. And I've seen you talk a lot about when Russell was going at that time and interviewed a little bit, and your thoughts on that. There's a big push in the fandom at times, I feel like, and this is both nationally in Seattle, from fans to just go and get that quarterback. And me, and through my years watching football, I keep coming back to, get the team first, kind of field of dreams it, like Costner out there in the fields. If you build it, they will come. Where do you stand on that? Do you sit as a former general manager saying, no, look, getting the quarterback is the ultimate thing to be done. Then you fit around him if you got that opportunity, just go and jump, or to my side of it, where you'd say, get the parameters in place first to go?
I don't think you can ever pass on a quarterback. I think you can draft one of those guys every year if you want, and you get a pretty good investment back if you're good at what you do. So I don't think you can say we're going to build the rest of this team before we get a quarterback, because you may never get another chance. So you got to strike when the opportunity comes as far as getting a quarterback. Here's the thing that I think fans don't probably know as much about as people inside buildings that do this for a living. We are much more critical of our players than fans are, or evaluators on the outside. In other words, there may be 6 or 7 quarterbacks that every evaluator outside the NFL loves. There may be only 2 or 3 that I like, or that a team likes. So they're not randomly picked off trees. And if you're going to pick a guy in the first round, especially, you better have a conviction for your evaluation and be really sure that you're getting what you get. I will say this. I have never drafted a quarterback in the first round. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't want to. It's never lined up for me when I was in charge of a draft where I could say, I have conviction for this guy. Let's go get him. It just doesn't happen. And I think fans think that happens all the time. It doesn't. There's a lot of drafts when there may be 1 or 2 guys that I have conviction on. The other 4 I don't really like. So it's hard to get that confidence and conviction and then have that guy be available to you. So I would never pass on one, though. I think it's the hardest thing to evaluate. The way these guys have to process information now is really hard to gather that information. And I know there's some NFL people do it better than others. I do bristle at the fact when people say it's a crapshoot, because I don't think it's a crapshoot at all. I think sometimes, again, a lot of people are good at doing it. A lot of NFL teams aren't. And that's just part of, team building per se.
Did you have a guy that you're willing to trade up on your time at GM that you just couldn't get a trade to go up and get a guy for, where the package of picks ended up being too costly for you to move up? To your point of never having taken that quarterback?
We always tried. I can't remember a quarterback, although one year when we were in Miami, both me and I loved Jay Cutler, and we would have probably taken a Jay Cutler if he had fell to us. but we had signed Culpepper at the time. And I remember Nick saying, now what do we do if he falls to us? I said, we're picking him. We got to have a young guy to hinge our future on. And so you've got to take them. And if it ends up being that you already have one, I think so be it. You get another one. Not to be completely crazy about it, but I don't remember ever swinging and missing and going crazy to try to get up and get one that I had that much conviction for, to be honest with you. There's a reason there's only about 10 or 12 of these guys that are walking the face of the earth right now that anybody would pay anything to get. Just think about that. There's not many of them out there.
And it's one of the most debated topics because of this is what's the value and where to go. And my only worry is that you get a situation at times like the Steelers did with Fields a couple years ago, where they didn't know he was going to fall. He fell. The team wasn't really ready as far as where they were offensively with their scheme, with the offensive line, with the playmakers on the outside. The running backs was just average. And they just kind of did that. We'll just go get him. And then they threw him into the fire. And I'm not saying Fields is going to be a good player now, but it's hard to make the evaluation of him as we stand a couple years down the line when he isn't given as much to deal with or work with on that side of it, because it was just that go pull the trigger and get the guy.
Right. No doubt. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It's just a risky position unless you have full consensus and conviction for your evaluation.
It's true. It's true. And I'm sure there's not one silver bullet answer on this one too, where there's kind of a variety of different directions you can go with it on how you apply it. But it's interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Just take the guy if to your point though, it's not take the guy just to pick him off the tree, but pick the guy that you've got hey, we know we love our evaluation. We love who he is as a player. And that's where I like the Seahawks have taken this approach where they've kind of slowly built this up a little bit. To kind of maybe finish this off, do you like where the Seattle Seahawks are going from an organizational standpoint? John Schneider, the moves he's making, the coaching staff they brought in, going with a defensive-minded coach in this offensive age we live in. Are you feeling good about that?
I do feel good about what they've done. I think the change is going to be refreshing for everybody, for the players included. A different scheme on defense. I think they've kind of underachieved on defense, to be honest with you, the last couple of years. So I think they'll be looking for a little edge, for some newness. I think they've done that, and they have not made a ton of moves in the personnel end for exactly what they're building. I think we'll see how this first year goes. Sometimes I always like to have a fresh set of eyes as an evaluator on my team as well. When they've got that now with a head coach, they've got some new assistants. So they must like some of these guys they have, because they haven't pulled the plug on a bunch of players and completely shuffled their roster. So I do like where they're at. I'm not saying that they're a Super Bowl team, but I think they'll compete for a playoff spot.
And moving in the right direction for the future, you believe that, as far as a potential couple years down the line, that this can be a team that contends?
Well, I think so.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you, Randy. I've already kept you double, I think, the time we were going to allot here today. So I thank you for coming on again. I would love to have you on again sometime if you ever have any opportunity, because I've got probably still dozens of other questions I'd love to dive into you with on this. But thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And folks, please do sub up to the podcast with Mike Sando and Randy Mueller. He also works with The Athletic right now, does Randy Mueller. So that's another great subscription that I highly recommend. They've got great content out there. I appreciate you, Randy, for coming on in, man. And I also just want to make sure to thank you again for all you did here with the Seattle Seahawks. You guided the organization at a time that wasn't the easiest of times as far as our fan base, and we were right on the edge of losing our team, and we lost our Sonics. So it's we're very sensitive to the fact that could have happened very easily at that time. And you're able to kind of guide the waters through there. It wasn't an easy situation. You weren't set up in the best of situations to go find success with where the organization was at. And I think you did a damn good job myself. So thank you for all you did for the team.
I appreciate that. I'm a Northwest guy, so it was a dream job for me, and still a Seattleite to this day. So I was happy to be with them for as long as I was. That's for sure.
Well, being a kid that was well aware growing up at that time and covering the team as in depth as I did, you were aware of what you were having to go with. And especially in Bering's case, it's no easy thing as a general manager when you not only don't have the money that you can spend, the guys like Eddie DeBartolo can go out there and spend, but then you also have a guy that's patently trying to move the team elsewhere. I mean, that's a double dip of, set up to failure in so many ways, but you didn't in that respect. So thank you, man. I appreciate it. And please do come back again here. I know people would love to have you back on here. So you have a good one, man. Thank you guys for watching today. Really, really appreciate it. Please hit that like button. And thank you, Randy. You have a good one as well.
Thanks.